Welcome, friends. We are back. I was going to say we're back on the fourth Wednesday, but it's actually not. It's the fifth Wednesday here in May. So grateful that we can be here for, my goodness, February, March, April, May, for our fourth community conversation. It has been a really special time for us to come into these spaces and to really delve deep into our understanding of our Unitarian Universalism as Black folks. And as we have known in various spaces, there has been a longing to really go deeper. We heard this at the convening back in 2017. We knew that from the survey. We did a survey of Black UUs in 2017 into 2018, where we really heard people say they wanted to have a deeper understanding, a deeper theological grounding for who they were as Unitarian Universalists and as Black people. And you know, we decided that we needed to have a big do theology year in 2019. So we started out with the community with the Whose Faith Is It Anyway panel in January, and have since followed up with one community conversation each month that focuses on one of our 7 principles of Black lives. So we are here to focus this evening on our fourth principle, which is that experimentation and innovation must be built into our work, right? This notion that it matters that we embrace the best tools, practices, and tactics and leave behind those that no longer serve us, right? That evaluation and assessment must be built into our work, that critical reflection must be part of all of our work, and that we learn from our mistakes as well as from our victories. And so we are here to talk about all of that and to proclaim, continue to proclaim a Black UU theological framework on our road to toward the Harper Jordan Memorial Symposium, where we will proclaim a Black UU theology from October 30th through November 2nd in St. Paul, Minnesota. So we are on our way there, slowly but surely. So I'm really excited to be here with my comrade and friend, Dr. Takia Amin, who is the content director for BLUU. And for those of you who may not know me, I'm Reverend Michael Slack. I'm the community minister for worship and spiritual care. So I'm really excited that we are all here and here with our special guests. Takia, why don't you go ahead and tell us a little bit about who's here with us tonight.
Hey, everybody. Takia Nur Amin here, content director and member of the organizing collective board for BLUU. Thank you so much for joining us for this month's community conversation that we've very much been looking forward to, on the idea that, you know, innovation and experimentation must be built into our work. We are really excited tonight to have 2 esteemed guests with us to enter into conversation. And, you know, I always say at the beginning of these community conversations, you know, please don't be on your best behavior. We're looking for you to show up as your full self. So everybody take a nice deep breath, roll those shoulders, relax. We're just going to be ourselves and have some good free-flowing conversation in here. For those of you in the BLUU community who have joined us, I'm going to ask some questions of our guests after our introductions before we move into a more open and free-flowing conversation. As you know, these community conversations are being recorded. We will be sure to edit out the Q&A portion before it gets posted to BLUU's YouTube channel, but that's a place where you'll be able to review the conversation. I know that people have been using videos from our previous conversations for small group ministry, for classroom sessions, for personal study. So we encourage you to continue doing that, okay? Settle in. I'm going to go ahead and introduce our guests. So we're really honored and excited to have Reverend Brandon Rencher, who is a minister, organizer, innovator, and church planter, and founder of the Good Neighbor Movement, an alternative spiritual community that is inclusive, multi-ethnic, people of color-led network of house churches referred to as city villages. So Brandon, why don't you unmute yourself? Go ahead and say hello. Give the people a nice shout out.
Yeah, hey, what's up, y'all? Thanks for having me. Brandon here, based in Greensboro, North Carolina, and really, really happy to be in conversation with you this evening.
Brandon, you're entirely too close to me. I'm in Charlotte, so You're
That's
entirely
what's up.
close to me for me not to come on up and experience some of what you're doing. So
That's what's up.
hopefully I can do that in the next couple of months. I would be really excited about doing that. We're also really excited tonight. I know I'm especially excited whenever I get to be around women in ministry. Everything in me just lights up. And we're honored to have the Reverend Canon Stephanie Spellers, who is one of the Episcopal Church's leading thinkers and consultants around 21st century ministry and mission, and is canon to the presiding bishop for evangelism and reconciliation. So Reverend Canon Spellers, can you unmute yourself and give a shout out to the people?
Hello, people, my people. I'm sure this will come up later, but I used to be a Black UU, even if I'm an Episcopalian now. So even just being on here with you, I'm like, oh, where were you when I needed you? So I was like, dang, yeah.
We here now.
Moving on. I'm kind of ensconced in the Episcopal Church now, in case you hadn't noticed. But it's so good to be with you and to think with you, and honestly to see what we can learn from each other in this time. So blessings, and thank you to Michael for the invitation in particular.
Well, we're really excited that you're here, and even folks who maybe looked at Unitarian Universalism in the past or were part of our community, it's okay. You can still be UU adjacent. So we love our UU adjacent family.
That's my dream. Thank you, Boo.
We love and welcome everybody. And Reverend Canon Spellers, I actually want to stay with you for our first question. So, we really are thinking about innovative models for ministry and during spiritual community. And I want to ask you what you think about, as someone who may not be connected to Unitarian Universalism in ways that some of our previous guests have. Can you tell us a little bit about how experimentation and innovation has shaped your own way of thinking about and doing ministry?
Absolutely. So just a small bit of background. As I mentioned, I'm now an Episcopal priest working for the presiding bishop. So in the National Episcopal Church offices, I'm based here in New York City, in Harlem. Hey, but when I was in college in North Carolina, there it is again. I went to Wake Forest University and discovered the UUs there, and they basically ushered me into spiritual community. And a part of what I remember, going from Wake Forest, and then I went to Harvard Divinity School, thinking that I might become a Unitarian Universalist minister. So I'm adjacent, but I was in there. I was totally in there. And part of what I'm recalling is that there was on the one hand a great openness among UUs, among Unitarian Universalists, a great openness to innovation. But there was also, and this was interesting, and I think it really goes to the heart of the Black Lives Matter conversation. I also experienced a lot of unexamined patterns of white supremacy. And if you were to say that to most UUs, they'd be like, oh, no. But there's a way that they place certain thinkers and certain kinds of thinking and certain kinds of communicating on a pedestal. And if you don't do that, then there's shade. There's totally UU shade.
There's palm tree level shade.
Well, then it's you ain't getting no sun under that shade. Well, and I come from a working class background, and so that really complicated things for me too among the UUs, because again, during my time, it was probably 5 years, I think, that I was associated with the UUs. And yeah, so I feel like there on the one hand was a lot of talk about innovation, but it was innovation within a box, innovation within a particular culture. Or it was innovation that appropriated somebody else's culture. We all know about that. And so I feel like as you explore the kinds of innovative models that would be really useful, really for the entire Unitarian Universalist community, and not just Black UU communities, I hope that what you'll really commit to is innovation, yes, but innovation that listens deeply to context, that honors context, and honestly, that lifts not just the resources of people on the margins, but the actual voices and presence of people on the margins. You hear me now? You hear me now? I've been gone a while, but I still remember, okay? And so, because I feel like there's room for that innovation where it's pick this, pick that from various communities of color. There's not the solidarity. And I feel like innovation in solidarity is that's the goal. And what I hope is that Black UUs could model that and could say, like, we're here as our whole selves. We are bringing our gifts, but we're also listening for other folks' gifts. And we're listening for gifts across class backgrounds as well as race backgrounds. And we're not just going to poach, but we're going to be in deep relationship with the folks who have these experiences, these ways of knowing the divine, of knowing what's holy. And then we're going to innovate out of that relationship instead of innovating out of, ooh, this was cool and creative, I'm going to grab that. I hope that makes sense. It was a part of my experience as a church planter in the Episcopal Church. I started a church in Boston, downtown Boston, at the cathedral. It was a church called the Crossing, a queer, mostly queer, community congregation, and like with a healthy, again, respect for not just the gifts, but the presence and voices and power of people of color. And that was not innovation that was especially welcome in the Episcopal Church, but we knew that we had to do that. And I feel like it made a real difference. Certainly it made a difference for me. And it was a different model for church planning and innovative ministry development. So be in context, be in solidarity, connect even beyond yourselves with people who may be different from you in other ways. And yeah, kind of model something so that the rest of the UU community can take notice and learn from it.
That's just really wonderful. Thank you for sharing all of that, because it's, in one way, it's deep affirmation of the work that we've been striving to do in Black Lives of Unitarian Universalism since about 2015. And that work hasn't always been welcome. That work hasn't always been, celebrated. But it's work that we believe in deeply. And it's work that's been affirmed by the kinds of folks who are often marginalized in mainstream and institutional sort of UU church culture, right? But there's something about that feels right for us too, as we continue to see our way through how to articulate the fullness of our identity in this faith tradition. So thank you so much for taking us there. Reverend Brandon, same thing for you. Can you talk to us about how innovation and experimentation has really shaped your work in ministry?
Yeah. Reverend Spellers, thank you so much for everything that you shared. It's resonating with me. I share a little background. So I feel like innovation, or at least trying to do innovation, was part of my DNA since a little kid. I remember, always trying to find ways to hustle, to bring what folks identified as their needs into fruition in my community. Now, I didn't always do it in the most legal or, the best ways as a kid. But as I got older and got a little education, as my people like to say, it helped me out a little bit. And hustlers for the holy, I like that. Yeah. In terms of innovation and ministry, that really came in seminary. I just grappling with my own call. I come out of Southern Black, the Southern Black church expression. In particular, it's Baptist and Holiness Pentecostal forms, really small, family-oriented, storefront country churches. And so I just wasn't exposed to a lot. And so when I went to seminary, what I discovered is that the question around innovation that they were grappling with in seminary, I went to seminary in Chicago and attended a number of theological schools there. As they were answering the question, they were saying things that sounded like the churches that I grew up in terms of the form and function of the way in which we did, maybe not the same theology, but the same kind of DNA. They were talking about, how do we do discipleship? How do we not be wedded to a building? How do we get out and reach folks right around, in the zip code of our church? How do we build up a multitude of leadership? And I'm just like, yeah, like I've never experienced clergy that were trained, theologically trained. Everybody had to put their hand to the plow, so to speak. We were always doing stuff out in the community, whether it had a C3, C4, C anything next to it. We were just trying to do what it took to survive, and to try to fill in the gaps where the government or our families maybe were falling through the cracks, and where the government wasn't really, connecting. And so as I began to grapple with how that would look in my leadership leaving seminary, I knew that I wanted to begin experimenting while I was in seminary with field education placements. And I found a little small rural church in Western North Carolina, in the mountains. By that time I had been encouraged. By that time I was really approaching the AME Zion Church in terms of ordination, and was being encouraged by my mentor at the time to really explore the United Methodist Church in terms of resources for innovation. And so I took him up on that, found a United Methodist rural church in Western North Carolina that had gotten a grant to do innovative ministry in a little dying congregation and dying neighborhood that was being gentrified. And they and so that's really where it started for me. And so I guess just to sort of round this out, for me, what Reverend Spellers raised up as innovation in context and in solidarity is crucial. For me, I began to explore who are the kinds of, what are the models of leadership, of innovative leadership, where folks have been listening well and where folks have been in solidarity. And in terms of the kinds of roles that we typically assign to these folks, I just know that the folks who did great pastoral care, that did visits in the community, were some of the best listeners. And I knew that organizers and activists, at least during the time when I was growing up, were incredible listeners in the community. And so I knew that whatever the model of ministry was going to be for me, it would need to prioritize those roles in the spiritual community. And so that was really crucial for me, so that we could listen well to the histories of people trying to be innovative already in places, and connect to those stories rather than feeling like we were starting from scratch or starting something that was, a blank slate, if you will. And so that's been really crucial for me to do that. And the same is true as we've gotten started in Greensboro doing innovative ministry, is just making sure that we draw from the histories of people of color who had their backs against the wall, creating something new in the midst of the landscape that they were facing. And I found a lot of resonance in Greensboro. We found a lot of resonance with in terms of spiritual community, two traditions. In terms of the African American religious experience, the hush harbors of the antebellum South. I think that is an under-interrogated resource for innovation for us, and then also in the Latinx context, the base ecclesial communities has resonated really deeply with our Latinx siblings here in Greensboro, and as I've spoken about this in other contexts, as another a resource for innovative ministry and spiritual community that is on the edges and fringes of our inherited institutions, and how they have or are not meeting the needs of the people in ways that is really empowering folks to take ownership of ministry in their communities.
Thank you so much for that. I mean, it just goes to show again that sometimes we have to go away from home to realize the value in what was at home, that we were living amongst models of innovation and experimentation, even if we didn't know that that's what they were, and that there was a richness and a deep value in the ministries that surrounded us. Really excited by this conversation. Reverend Spellers, I'm coming back to you. You know, we've been talking about this principle, this commitment that we have in BLUU, that innovation and experimentation has to be built into the work that we are doing. And because we have been committed to doing work at the intersection of faith organizing, spiritual community, and justice making. You know, for us, justice making and living into our faith are not two separate things, right? They exist in the same conversation, which in some ways already makes what BLUU is doing separate from the way the institutional faith conceptualizes and talks about itself. Can you talk to us about, you know, from your perspective, what is it about innovation or experimentation sort of as a commitment, you know, that feels real and relevant in terms of the work that you do in the world? As a person who does innovative ministry, what feels real and relevant with respect to the ideas of experimentation and innovation as sort of a mandate for your work?
I mean, it's all of that as a mandate for my work has been really from the beginning of my ministry, my ordained ministry, but really ministry period. Because I grew up in a small city in Kentucky with a family that wasn't especially religious. But the reason they were not very, very religious was because my grandmother was very suspicious of religious leaders. And so her thing was, seems like a lot of what they say just serves them and don't serve us. So I was raised by people who were kind of engaging that, God, I can't believe I'm using this phrase, but the hermeneutic of suspicion. Ha ha. So always asking, why did they do that? Why did they say that? What did they get out of it? And I think that when you ask that question enough, what you'll also start to do is to say, well, why can't we do it this other way? Why can't we honor these other gifts? Why can't we stretch this rule or this boundary or this box in different ways? And I just keep hearing my grandmother honestly saying, girl, who really wins if you do what they told you to do? Seems to me like they get a lot more out of this than you do or than we do. So that hermeneutic of suspicion, I feel like informs my work, informs my innovation, where it's not just being creative for the sake of being creative. It's being creative for the sake of being free. And creating liberative communities. So it's not even just, I'm free, woo! But it's we need to innovate in order to create the shape of community where people are free and where people experience themselves with dignity and holiness and experience other folk with the same. And right now, I feel like when you look around at the shape of a lot of religious communities, you don't see liberative space. You see space that serves somebody's needs, like my grandmother would point out. So for me, a lot of my commitment to innovation is like, I'm not an artist. I'm not like any of this stuff. But what I am is somebody who just, it's like I have this antenna and I can look at systems. I can look at whatever is in front of me and be like, that seems like patriarchy. That looks like white supremacy. And not just the labels, but that looks like it's protecting one group of people and disappearing another or hurting another group of people. So for me, that's what informs the innovation. And I would hold that out to y'all as well. And I feel like that's in the principle that you've named here, this fourth principle around innovation. And I've got it here where it's like, yeah, embrace the best tools and practices and tactics and leave behind those that no longer serve us. In other words, leave behind the ones that do not serve the dream of freedom and dignity and hope and love. And when you see something that's not serving that purpose, create. But create something that will. Don't just create. Create something that will serve that greater purpose. And honestly, create something that will free everybody. Not just us as Black folk, but free everybody. That's the thing. And again, I hear my grandmother on that. Like, that's just, that's her being like, don't do what they did. Like, they built something that was just for them. Don't repeat that. Like, if you're going to innovate toward beloved community.
That's right. Yeah. It's so wonderful to hear you say that again, because there have been times in BLUU where we have, in the organizing collective, where we've been sitting around trying to plan or envision something, and someone will say, it would be great if we could do X, Y, Z. And then there's usually a silence, and then someone will go, why can't we? And we sort of look around and it's, okay, grab the markers, grab the sticky, because oftentimes it's doing the work of breaking ourselves out of frameworks and modes, ways of working, ways of being that have been passed down as the way to do things. And envisioning new models for the work. I mean, one of the things that has been a real challenge for us is that we organize in a flat structure. So we don't have a hierarchical structure in the organizing collective. We have a covenant, a set of working agreements that grounds the way we work and our religious principles. And it took us months to come up with those working agreements. Anybody who's watching, you can go to BLUU's website, scroll to the bottom and download our working agreements. Anybody can have them. But it took us, we prayed and we labored over every word, because those agreements have really formed the floor of how we come together to work. The beauty of it has been, when we get together to work, we don't have to talk about how we're going to work together, because we spent time really fleshing that out. And people were, saying, well, you can't work like that. You can't organize like that. There's got to be, a leader. There's got to be a this. There has to be. And we were like, well, we're not doing it that way. And it has been a real blessing to be reminded that the way it's been done isn't the way we have to do it, especially if the way it's been done has marginalized and dehumanized and hurt people. It's how do you build at this intersection of how can we do the least harm theologically and the most good in our work in the world, right? And that's not always an easy question, but at least being willing to ask it has been exciting. The other thing that I really appreciate in what you're saying is, in this work that we've been doing to really proclaim and articulate a Black UU theology, we're clear that, that's not just useful for Black people.
Exactly.
Right? If it's really about liberation and leaning into love and beloved community, that's going to be a blessing to the entire faith and hopefully beyond it. I mean, there have already been sort of ripples of that where things have happened that none of us could anticipate. You just kind of look around and go, I guess that's Holy Spirit doing what Holy Spirit does. But it's been, deeply scary too sometimes. I mean, sometimes people don't talk about the anxiety that can come with innovation too, when you aren't doing it the way you've been told it should be done.
Well, and let's be clear too that there's a cost, and I think it's a higher cost that Black folk in majority white spaces pay when we innovate. Because I think the flip side of that is a lot of these institutions and communities, these majority white institutions, it's like there's a covenant that they have with us. And they don't say it out loud, but we know it's there. And the covenant is, if we as Black folk master whiteness, master white culture, master whatever it is that they've set out, if we master that, they will send us as far as we want to go. They will let us rise to a degree. And so there's I think there's I'm thinking about the wages of whiteness, but I'm actually like I can't remember her name, but you know what it's like. That article back, Peggy McIntosh, was it?
Yep.
I'm actually it's almost like there's a wage that Black folk earn when we're willing to when we're not just play by, but master the white rules. And the flip of that is that there's a cost we pay when we stop playing by those rules. And so it's not even as simple as like, go innovate, but also to say, stop doing that which you have taken up in order to get the points, in order to get the bennies, in order to get wherever it is that the UU or Episcopal, I mean, I was writing some notes earlier today. I'm like, I may be in a hierarchical church with bishops and everybody else, but I still get the rewards that y'all get when I play by a certain set of rules. And I still have to pay a lot of the costs when I say, I'm not playing that anymore. Especially when I'm surrounded by other Black folk who are more than willing to play it. And I'll just offer this example, worship. That at least in the Episcopal Church, there are a lot of Black Episcopalians who are more conservative in their worship style than white Episcopalians. And it's kind of like, how did that happen? But then you realize, oh, they've set themselves up as the protectors of the tradition so that they'll be useful and indisposable or indispensable.
You gotta outdo them.
Right, exactly, because then they won't kick us out. Then they'll value us. Then they'll elevate us to a certain place. So I kind of like, that's a part of what we have to learn to say no to. I've had so many people come up to me and say, you would get further if you would do blank. And it's usually something. They're like, you would have been a bishop by now if you would blank. And I'm like, first of all, I don't want to be a bishop. But secondly, like that's not what I'm in this for. I'm in this to serve God. I'm in this to follow the Jesus who certainly did not like succeed by any stretch, by any standard, by any reading of that story. Jesus was not successful. But that's the thing where I'm like, oh yeah, I'm gonna have to let a lot more go than I realized if I'm going to be innovative. So I offer that honesty really to y'all. This is harder than it looks.
Oh my God, you were
my heart is sitting here with the Jesus who didn't succeed.
Mm-hmm. I know exactly. Thank you. I just need to just say thank you for that for that whole word that you just gave, because it speaks so powerfully to the stuff that we sit in often, right?
We don't talk about
as Black UUs who have made a decision that the old way is not our way. We sit in so much of that all the time and come up against, like, what does it look like and mean to innovate and co-create, right? To actually co-create with other Black UUs in a way that has meaning to Black UUs, but obviously isn't serving the folks who feel like this faith is meant to serve them and not us. And so I just wanted to say thank you for that.
Yeah. Reverend Brandon, I'm coming to you. Same sort of idea that we've been chewing on here. You do innovative work in the world in your ministry. So what feels most relevant to you with respect to this idea of innovation and experimentation being built into the work?
Yeah. I feel like, just drawing again from the Hush Harbors, because that's where I'm spending a lot of my time these days. I'm camping out there. I feel like there's wisdom in the way in which they created what we now call Caucus Faces, but I don't think that at least the churches that I've engaged have seen that as a tool, as a source for innovation in terms of spiritual community. And we take very seriously that in our city villages, being able to have this space. I often hear folks reflect back to one another and to me, to just have the space to come and breathe and center and reflect on experience, not just to experience things, is really, really crucial. And to be able to have the space and presence of mind and conversation partners to be able to say, okay, that didn't work so well. Let's not do that again. Or maybe it's, we observed that this didn't work so well for that group. How can we learn from this to do things differently? I just think that's so crucial to have those kinds of spaces. I know that, in terms of this cost piece, most innovation work within at least a denomination has a very serious timeline on it in terms of funding. And so we want to get down to the nitty gritty of how most innovative things are funded. Folks are used to have paradigms that come from the secular world, secular business models of what a timeline looks like in terms of return on investment. And even how we pitch our ideas, and even how we advocate for a certain kind of timeline and funding, all that has to be, the innovation and justice and solidarity has to be baked in from the beginning. And I remember having conversations with our judicatory early on about these very questions of what's the length of time that you have to do this, and what does fruit or success look like. And because, as we've mentioned, the vision for what innovation is usually co-opting our people's stuff. And so therefore they don't actually know what fruit looks like. And so anything that folks say, white folks in particular, say about what fruit looks like or what success looks like is not actually fruit. It's much more exploitative. It's much more sort of an inch deep and a mile wide kind of thing. And so, I just think that being able to have a community that advocates with us when we pitch our ideas, being able to have a community with us whenever we advocate for the kind of logistics that we need to really fulfill the vision that God has placed on our heart and in community, is just really, really crucial. I can't tell you how many times I've got a meeting coming up on this coming Monday with a person in my judicatory, and my wife, Erica, told me, we made a commitment to never go anywhere alone. Like anyone in our community, like as much as we can, we need to go together. We need to be, we need to squat up, and I kind of wanted to retreat from that a little bit, and just felt like, I can go to this meeting by myself on this coming Monday. And several folks in my community were like, no, like we said, we got you. Like, like we'll be there with you, and it's something about being able to move in that kind of a way that puts authenticity to our innovation in a way that helps us to believe in its integrity before we meet whatever the kind of vision of success we have down the line. I just think that's super, super crucial. And that's been really relevant for me, because I just feel like I always have folks down my throat or sort of at my back in terms of these folks in positions of power who have already decided what innovation looks like for them. And usually, like I said, it comes from a particular white vision of what innovation is, which is usually, in my context, saving white churches, which is like not innovative at all. And they are, again, co-opting principles and practices and tactics from Black and brown communities, but not following them sort of all the way to the root. And so it's shallow. And so in some ways, the last thing I'll say is, the other thing is that I think that I've had to contend with the fact that, there's an old saying, y'all probably familiar with it, that, when folks tell you who they are, believe them, and, I think there's some wisdom in letting some of these institutional powers and principalities fall flat. You know, there's a lot of conversations in my denomination around saving things, and I don't want that thing to be saved, you know. And so, like, you know, and I think that that Black and brown community, especially those folks in our community that are the most marginalized, have a great gift to offer to the world, to our institutions, of what it looks like to not rely on those institutions and those resources, and still be doing the damn thing. And I just think that's really, really powerful to be able to remember that. And so that's been really crucial for me. You know, a lot of folks are reaching out. The United Methodist Church is in a real struggle. It's not, don't get me talking about that. I don't want to, how do I say this? We will keep doing the work that our souls must have here in Greensboro. And it doesn't matter what's happening with that institution, we will keep doing that, and that it will involve all of us, few of us. And so I think that's really crucial. Yeah, I think those are the things that come up for me.
What's really helpful about that too is, you know, in the work that BLUU has done since the beginning, people will ask, well, how can you do that without whatever resource they've decided we need? And it's like, well, because we just did.
Yeah.
You know, if the UUA disappeared tomorrow? Well, I mean, if the UUA disappears, my faith doesn't go with it.
Yeah.
The needs of our people don't disappear with the end of that institution. So the work is still with us, despite, you know,
yes.
in Unitarian Universalism, there's a real push to save buildings.
Okay.
We love to save buildings. You know, people donate lots of money because they want their name on a building or on a wing. You know, money will come into a congregation and not a percentage of it will go to religious education or outreach or other ministries that are really starved. It'll all go to the windows or, you know, and the question has to become, for whom are you saving the building?
Yes, exactly.
Right? Like, is that the best way for us to be stewards of these resources? And so beginning to, in some ways, disinvest not only from those ways of thinking, but from believing that those institutions hold sway over the truth of our mission in the world.
Exactly.
Right? It seems really important. Like we've had to begin to pull out of that, you know, and not even get so caught up in, you know, they're doing X, Y, Z. Well, we're busy doing 1, 2, 3. So
that's right. That's right.
You know, bless them, but we have other work to do.
Yeah, that's
I feel like that's where Brandon's wisdom, if I may, Brandon's wisdom is so important here, is that Black folk, many of us, come from traditions or just from a culture where innovation was necessary because these institutions were not like, they either weren't as deeply rooted or they were vulnerable, or we just always had to be on the move. So it was kind of, I mean, it was like the Israelites in the wilderness, you know, kind of, you know, or in the desert sort of thing, you know. And so I think that there's a flexibility and a nimbleness that we understand that a lot of our peers in these majority white institutions can't imagine. And I feel like that's, I know as I've done work and just been a Black person in the Episcopal Church, one of the things I talk a lot about is our special sauce. What's the thing that we bring that actually the rest of the church desperately needs? What is the thing that we have that is necessary for their salvation? And I think that this ability to be nimble, to not be tied to a building, to not be tied to a particular form, or a particular cultural expression, or a particular class ranking, or educational background, that's a big one. Like, we know how to let stuff go because it seems like every time we have something, somebody takes it away. So I feel like that ability to release and to keep going and to travel lightly is a real gift. That the rest of the churches, the rest of especially kind of mainline and other kind of churches really need right now. They haven't come up traveling lightly. They've come up with buildings and, you know, and getting big money from big people, and having big names on the buildings. And I feel like that's not the age we're in right now. And it's certainly not the age we're going into spiritually and organizationally. You know,
Well, even when, you know, when we talk about Blackness, one of the critiques, I hesitate to even call it that. I would rather call it an assumption that's come up. You know, people will say, well, you know, when you all are, because BLUU will host programming often that is explicitly Black sacred space.
Good.
You know, some of our programs are open and offerings are open, but some of our programs are just for Black folks in our faith tradition. And it'll be, you know, well, that must be so boring. It's like, well, what makes you say that? It's like, well, you know, well, it's not diverse. And it's like, do you know Black people? Like, you know, Blackness is always already diverse in any way that you might think of what that means. But this idea that we have to have the presence of, and usually they mean white folks. They're not even talking about non-Black people of color or indigenous folks. They mean white folks for something to be read as diverse or inclusive or valuable, is something that we've had to push back on. So Reverend Spellers, I want to stay with you. What would you share with us, you know, as Black UUs who are really sort of trying to push into a season of articulating our experience in this faith in a way that resonates for us and for others? How do you think this principle around innovation and experimentation can really guide us in living out a faith that centers both our shared and diverse experiences as Black people?
I guess I kind of tripped into this one already a little with the special sauce.
Which I love, by the way.
Yay, anytime.
I got it because we some special sauce.
We got special sauce. We're bringing the special sauce. It's like, I know you made that meal. Now you need special sauce. And luckily we brought a whole pot of it. Hi. You know? And I got that just so I remember hearing one of my priest friends, a Black sister, Lynn Washington, spoke of that like a few years ago, and it's just really stayed with me. But yeah, it's like, how do we live out our kind of particularity within these spaces, but also help to transform these spaces, you know, help to transform these majority white communities?
And I mean, I hate to jump in, but it makes me ask me, because I just don't know, are Black folks doing something similar in the Episcopal Church? Are there like Black Episcopalians that gather and do their own thing?
Oh my God, yeah. It's called the Union of Black Episcopalians. We just celebrated the 50th anniversary down in the Bahamas actually last year. That was fun. But yeah, because just, if you think about colonial patterns or like where colonial powers were based, and that the Episcopal Church is the American branch of the Church of England. So we have a lot of presence in the Caribbean. And a lot of folk have come from the Caribbean to the States with their Anglican faith. And there are a number of Black folk who became Episcopalian after, or like during the antebellum period, and then following our release. But it's hard. It's completely hard, and we have to keep reinventing it every few years. Partly because of what I said before, because there's so many benefits to playing the game as Black folk, and yeah, so we have to keep reminding ourselves, special sauce, bring the sauce, even if they don't want it, bring the sauce, because actually, like a commitment to liberation, a commitment to intergenerational relationship, a curiosity about wisdom that is not only book wisdom. So now I'm listing some of the elements of the special sauce, if you will. And an openness to the full expression of joy, embodiment, not feeling like the body is something that has to somehow be transcended, but actually that the body can be the very vehicle for holiness. There are a lot of things that we come with as Black folk that our majority white traditions and communities need to survive. They are dying because they don't know how to be embodied. What is the environmental crisis except, like white cultures, European cultures that don't know how to be in relationship with the earth and with their own bodies? Come on now. But you have Native peoples, you have Black folk, you have others who are saying, you can't live this way. What are you doing? What are you doing? Snap out of it. Like be a human being, be on this earth. Stop being afraid of the earth. Stop being afraid of your body. Stop being afraid of joy. Oh my goodness. They're so suspicious of joy. People are constantly coming up to me being like, so you seem fake. Like, you seem like you've never really experienced freedom, because if you had, then you would understand joy. Or you've maybe not experienced a lot of suffering, because if you had, then you would know joy. And you would know how much you needed joy. So there's a special sauce, and I find it to be, I've led workshops, honestly, with Black Episcopalians on what is our special sauce? What is the thing that we bring that at this particular moment in our church's life, the entire church needs? And that is a powerful, powerful exercise. And I cannot encourage you enough to do that. Mm-hmm. I feel like you've kind of done that with the principles, in a way, like by taking the UU principles and then kind of grafting them with Black Lives Matter. I feel like you've kind of done some of that, but I wonder what it would look like to be even more forward with, here's what we have that at this particular moment, the Unitarian Universalist community and faith needs.
Well, it's just amazing because a couple of years ago, we had a Black UU revival. And, folks in the mainstream faith were like, a Black UU what? Mm-hmm. Like, can you do that? Because there have been this pervasive.
First of all, what's a Black UU? Secondly, what's a revival?
Well, first, and this implicit idea, right, that you can't have, we have people telling us you can't have worship that's Black and UU at the same time.
Yes.
That you must have worship, if it's going to be truly UU, then surely it sublimates Blackness. And we were just like, nope.
No, that's not how we're doing it.
Because we, those of us who, I grew up I'm originally from Buffalo, New York. I grew up in a multi-faith family, very much working class. My grandparents were AME and Baptist. My parents were ex-Black Panthers who were in the nation and, in a progressive Islamic community when I was born. And so growing up with all of that, it's like, I don't split like that. You can't kind of cut me in half and tell me, well, it has to be this, but you have to check Blackness. That just wasn't going to work. And the way that we were able to experience joy together in community, and also make space for corporate lament, because Unitarian Universalism institutionally doesn't really make space for that in worship. And as a person, my PhD, my academic background is in dance studies. So as someone who shows up embodied, it has a commitment to that as a way sort of just of being in the world, to be able to create spaces, not just for myself, but to create spaces for with and for my people that prioritize the things you're talking about. Mm-hmm. That's really
that. It feeds us. And it is the antidote to what has I'm going to be bold and say this, what has enslaved white culture. That actually, and I'm kind of, again, because I'm in such, like, the Episcopal Church is like 90% white. I think you all are even whiter, so I feel like a part of my ministry simply is like being curious about what would it look like for white people to be free. And what I have come to understand is that they actually need us way more than we need them. And that's, I'm not a missionary, I'm not a martyr or any of that stuff. but I'm just clear that there's something we understand about being human, being on this earth, being fully human. And we don't always get it right. Good God, no. But when we are centered in our Blackness, so coming back to what you said, Takia, when we are centered in Blackness, there is something that we can share that I think contributes to the freedom, the liberation, the fullness, the flourishing of everybody, especially majority white faith communities.
Thank you so much, Reverend Spellers, for joining us. I know we had talked about this earlier. You have to take your leave. You have to leave a little early tonight. We are sad. We are so sad to see you go. So grateful that you could be with us, sharing all of the wisdom that you shared in this space. So thank you for being here. It's always a pleasure for me because you and I have had a chance to connect in years past. So I'm really grateful that you get to see this beautiful work that we get to do together. Do you have any closing remarks? You spoke a lot just now, spoke some beautiful things into the space, but if you have some closing remarks before you go, we'd love to hear them.
I think I just want to make sure that you know that you are not alone. Takia, you were asking, like, are Episcopalians doing this too among Black folk? And like, yes, we are. This conversation is so important. So keep drawing each other closer. Please don't hurt each other the way that others have hurt us. Please don't create hierarchies of Blackness among yourselves.
Yes.
That actually only reinforce and that do the bidding of the ones who don't want any of us to survive.
Say that. Yes.
Yeah. And just love each other, because that's the other thing is Black folk at our best, we know how to love. Like, think of all those white people who were raised by Black women, for generations, and they're like, oh, nobody loved me like my mammy, whatever. And it's like, and it's a horrible thing, but the other side of it is that, like, in the worst situations, we kept rising up with love. And so may you continue to rise up with love and know that there are other sisters and brothers and siblings all around you throughout this crazy community known as the faith community. And we are trying to rise up with love too, and we pray for you. Please pray for us.
Absolutely. Thank you again.
Thanks, Reverend Spellers.
Mwah! You're beautiful.
So are you. Thank you.
Woo! All right, I'm gonna go and check on my partner. Actually, I just got home right before the session started, and he actually has just come home from surgery. So I need to go say, hey, how you doing, boo? So,
go do the family thing.
Go do your thing. Take good care.
All. God bless. God bless. Peace.
Bye now. Peace.
Reverend Brandon, I am coming to you. Still hanging on with this same theme. The work that we're doing in BLUU is exciting and also deeply challenging work for us. For many of us, it's not work that we thought we'd be doing at this point in our lives, but we do it because Spirit has called us to it and because it feels like urgent work to be doing, urgent and holy work. How do you think this principle around innovation and experimentation can really guide us in continuing to living out a Unitarian Universalism that really centers Blackness? How do you think that principle of innovation and experimentation gets us there?
Lost you there for a moment. I missed the very last part of what you said. You said, how can the principle guide you? And
yeah, how does the principle of innovation or experimentation guide us in living out our faith in a way that really centers Blackness?
Yeah. I still love what Reverend Spellers said about hierarchies of Blackness. my sense is that who I'm really grappling with around innovation are my people. And I think that, I think of America that like you critiquing, you challenge what you love. Oh. You all there? Can you hear me?
Yep.
Can you hear me?
Yep. You're breaking up a little bit, but we got you. Keep going.
Awesome. Okay. Yeah, I think that, I feel like the moment that we're in is really calling forth us to acknowledge the fracturing of even institutions within the Black community, and having a willingness to let some things go in order to see something new be birthed. And I know that that's very difficult in our communities because, for a lot of our institutions, they were institutions that were created out of segregation. And so many of them go back generations, and there's a desire to keep them going, forever and ever. And, because in many ways, take, for example, the Black church, which is in many ways, my members, the members of our church, are folks that are in exile or see themselves as having made an exodus out of conventional Black churches, and have spent most of their lives, half their lives, sort of, they describe it as being in the wilderness. And so I think a big part of what this principle invites us to do is to explore what innovation has already looked like in our community amongst, whether we want to call this alternative Black folks or Black, the ways in which Black folks have always went through cycles of death and rebirth in terms of our institutions, in order to bring forth in the world communities and institutions that serve our needs and serve all of us and not just some of us. And so, can you all hear me okay?
You're doing great, Brandon.
Okay, awesome. And so, that's something that we grapple with a lot in the Good Neighbor movement here in Greensboro, is how do we be in conversation with, and this is really speaks to the intergenerationalism that Reverend Spellers was alluding to, because I feel like the biggest grappling that I want to give my energy towards is with my own people, in terms of us bringing forth in the world collectively what we need to face and thrive in the midst of, the crises that we face right now. And, I keep going back to the hush harbors, but for me, it's been important to legitimize our offering to the community in a way that is rooted in our own history. And for sure, there are other examples, and I think it's important that we look to them. But for us, we have just found a lot of resonance in the hush harbors, in the ways in which it's not, so the way we talk about it is, it's not that Black folks had limited opportunities to worship in the plantation economy. They had plenty of opportunities to worship, and many of them took advantage of that. Learning to read the Bible from mistresses and from the spouses of masters. But what was it that made a remnant of our ancestors be discontent with worship? Or another way to put it is the sort of proto-institution of the Black church on the plantation. What made them be discontent with that and go off into the woods and create their own thing? And so I think that finding ways to grapple with Black folks within the Black community, to have that intracommunal conversation with our elders, with younger folks, amongst one another, so that what we provide is a multitude of opportunities for folks to engage in work and to engage in relationship building and to engage in practices that are life-giving. Because as we just mentioned, the Black community is diverse, and we need more than just, one or two or however many, there doesn't need to be a scarcity mindset around the kinds of resources we need around spirituality and spiritual communities within the Black community. And, I'll be honest, like I found that some of my greatest challenges have been having conversations with established Black churches who have a lot of anxiety around innovation amongst Black folks, and especially innovating new Black spiritual communities. And just being in a relationship enough to say like, yo, like we're not trying to take nobody from y'all, we want to find ways to be in collaboration. I just think that conversation is really, really important. And in the midst of the conversation, not to lose yourself, like your passion to do something that, like you already mentioned, that serves the interests, the needs of the people who you are rocking with. Because there is a temptation to dilute the work of innovation for the sake of what already exists, and we can do more. Who was it that I was talking to recently? Like, we can multitask. Black folks can multitask. Like, we can do more than one thing. Like, we can have more than one thing in our community to provide for the spiritual needs of Black people. And for us, that has meant contending with the ways in which innovation has happened in our history, on the edges of or outside of our really cherished and inherited institutions, so that when I'm talking to that Black pastor or when I'm talking to that nonprofit leader, and I'm like, I don't want to be a threat to you. Like I don't want you to be a threat to me. How can we work together, and how can we acknowledge that we both bring something unique to the Black community, and that here's the lineage that my practice and our community is based in, that is Black too. And so I have found that to be a more interesting conversation for our church and our people, and it has allowed us to stay in the conversation as a conversation partner, and not just simply a kind of talking bag for our elders, or to be and it keeps it invigorating, so that what I'm saying to white folks about who we are is grounded in an actual practice of being in conversation amongst the diversity of Blackness within my community, and still offering before our community, something divergent, something different than what is already sort of in the landscape.
I really appreciate what you said about, this kind of spirit of partnership and collaboration too. Mm-hmm. That isn't about, I'm trying to take away from what you're doing, mm-hmm. or undermine what you're doing, or what I'm doing is fundamentally better than what you're doing, but really seeing it as partnership, mm-hmm. instead of seeing it as continuum. Mm-hmm. One of the things that we've had to say repeatedly in UU spaces is, we're not speaking for all Black Unitarian Universalists. We're creating some spaces and doing some work, and people are welcome to engage here, and they're welcome to engage in other spaces and make other things. And, it doesn't have to come from a scarcity model. It doesn't have to come from, there's only a little to go around. There can only be one group for, it doesn't have to be this kind of scarcity coming from a place of lack.
Yes.
And also, when you come at it, I think from that more collaborative model, it begs the question that Reverend Spellers was talking about earlier. Like, if we're competing with each other or saying my thing is better than your thing, who exactly or what systems are benefiting from us not working together like that?
That's right.
What systems are benefiting from the refusal to collaborate? So, mm-hmm. We've looked for opportunities and will continue to do so in terms of partnering meaningfully, and, mm-hmm. Because it doesn't have to be this cutthroat, kind of kind of thing. If people are finding, a lot of folks, I'm sure you've seen them, every so often there will be articles that say, oh, millennials are leaving the church, or whoever is leaving the church. And it's like, what we find is people are actually leaning into their faith just in different spaces.
That's right.
And so if somebody is happy going to Bible study at a bookstore, that doesn't necessarily mean it's undermining the 150-year-old church up the street.
Exactly.
But how can they be in conversation in ways that feel more meaningful? So I really appreciate you lifting up that model of collaboration and partnership. Okay, Reverend Michael, I'm throwing it to you so that we can start to wrap up.
All right. My goodness, this has been rich. Thank y'all so much for coming and being a part of this. Thank you so much, Reverend Brandon, for sharing so much of your heart and soul and work with us. For those of you who were coming in after she left, Reverend Canon Stephanie Spellers was also with us tonight, and that was a deep joy. We missed Crystal Cheatham, who was supposed to be with us but had to deal with some inclement weather in Philadelphia. So we have been wishing her well throughout our time tonight. Wanted to just offer up some takeaways from our time. There were many, but just a few in particular that resonated in this space. We talked a lot about moving away from innovation within a box, right? An innovation that may be appropriative and into innovation that is innovation in solidarity, as well as innovation. We talk about this a lot, innovation in context, right? Like having some real clarity around like really where we are and who we are and who we are with, and really growing into whatever magic is already settling into these spaces that we are in as Black folks and as Black UUs. Related to that, we talked about, and I believe this might have been you, Reverend Brandon, talking about drawing from people's stories, like really listening and allowing that to be the place where innovation and experimentation is the sort of outgrowth of people's stories, and also being reminded that we've been here for a minute, right? And have been innovative and engaged in experimentation and innovation for generations and generations, because we've had to, right? And right, that's right, Kathy, not to create just to create, but to stand in our Blackness, right? That's absolutely it. And create something that builds our liberation and our freedom. Being creative for the sake of being free, right? Rather than space that serves somebody else's needs, creating space that is truly liberatory, and breaking out of those old ideas and old ways of doing things, right? And not rely on what any other person or any institution has us do or has told us that we have to do. We talked tonight about reflecting on experience, not just experiencing things, right? That we can take who we are and what we're doing and how we are becoming as an opportunity to reflect on what's next, right? We also talked about innovation that is relational and not individualistic, innovation that is transformative, not transactional, right? I was really appreciative of Reverend Canon Spellers talking about bringing our special sauce as Black people, right? And she would lift up what some of that special sauce is, right? A commitment to liberation, wisdom that's not just about book learning, about embodiment, connection, real connection to ourselves and to the earth, the fullness of joy, all of the things that we sort of come with that will ultimately not just save us as Black people, but that will save all of us. Everyone has talked on some level about the fact that, Black folks have always been through cycles of death and rebirth, right? And that we can put down that which doesn't serve us and use the offerings that have already been bestowed upon us, that we already carry within ourselves, to do and be in beautiful ways and in ways that are new, and that give us all life. So those are some of the takeaways from tonight. I see some, yes, having more joy for ourselves. I see some notes in here. Thank you all so much for that. Yep, not just to create, but to stand in our Blackness and create something that builds our liberation and our freedom. So it has been a remarkably rich and beautiful conversation tonight. I'm glad that folks are here for it. Our next community conversation will be coming up the 4th Wednesday of June. That is June 26th at 7:30 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. And we're grateful to have some amazing folks, Monica Cosby and Chris McElroy, with us to talk about our 5th principle, which is that most directly affected people are experts at their own lives. So we're excited for that conversation. Hope that all of you will come back, including our special guest. Please join us for that. If you want to come, let me know. We'll make sure you can be here. And I'm thrilled. This has been so good. So much for me to chew on. Do you have any thing that you want to add? I know we want to offer some Reverend Brandon an opportunity to give some closing remarks. Do you want to add anything, Takia, before we do that?
No, I just want to thank everybody again for coming. Reverend Brandon, I'm coming to you. Any final thoughts you want to share with those gathered here?
Yeah, y'all, this is beautiful. I'm inspired by y'all, and keep doing what you're doing, and yeah, connecting with other efforts like the gathering and other folks, finding ways to collaborate to keep each other encouraged. You know, I just feel like the institutions that our innovation may be housed in, isn't always the place where we receive the kind of nurture and sustenance that will keep us going in the innovation. And so I love the fact that y'all are reaching out to other partners and folks in other institutions to be in conversation. And so I would just say, just keep, and this is really encouragement for myself too, for us to keep our eyes open, keep our hearts open to see where spirit is moving amongst Black folks doing innovative stuff, so that we can partner and support and be encouraged. So thank y'all so much for allowing me to share space with y'all.
Grateful for your life, Reverend Brandon. I know Takia and I are going to have to get to Greensboro together.
Yeah, we coming already.
Yeah, we coming.
Road trip.
Road trip.
Look, I can get to Greensboro in 2 hours flat, and that's with stopping to go to the bathroom. So I want everybody to unmute yourself so that we can hear everybody say goodbye, and then we'll return everybody to your evening.
Bye.
Bye. Take care,
so
y'all.
Peace.
Take care, everybody.
Have a blessed evening, everybody.
Peace.
Peace, y'all.
Bye.
Bye.